Breaking news! Ontario makes a bold move, cutting off U.S. ties and turning Europe's way to seize a staggering $20 billion battery jackpot. In a quiet but seismic shift, this province is redefining North American geopolitics and reshaping global supply chains. What does this mean for the future of economic independence? Stay tuned as we dive into this game-changing development that could alter the balance of power worldwide. You don't want to miss this. Let's get into it.
I'm fighting like hell, and we're going to protect Canada. He's underestimating the Canadian people, the resilience of the Canadian people, and the strength of the Canadian people.
For decades, North America operated under the assumption of seamless economic integration. The United States and Canada built their industries on mutual trust, with supply chains seamlessly crossing borders, power grids interconnected, and markets deeply intertwined. Ontario, in particular, exemplified this harmony, serving as a vital hub for the U.S. auto industry, with Detroit's automotive giants relying heavily on Canadian manufacturing and resources.
And today I have a major announcement, and are you ready to hear this? This is on behalf of Scott, Secretary of Treasury, Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Commerce. We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. Nobody's going to get around that.
However, that trust was shattered when the Trump administration introduced aggressive tariffs, doubling steel and aluminum duties, and weaponizing trade as a geopolitical tool. The move was perceived in Ontario not merely as economic protectionism, but as a betrayal of long-standing cooperation. The once robust supply chains and industrial symbiosis began to fracture. In response, Ontario's leadership, motivated by a desire for economic resilience and independence, began charting a new course. The province's decision to forge a $20 billion electric vehicle EV battery deal with Volkswagen marked a turning point. Unlike previous agreements that primarily served North American markets, this deal was explicitly aimed at powering European vehicles. Not a single battery produced at the St. Thomas Gigafactory would be destined for the U.S. Instead, it would energize over 1 million European cars annually. This shift was not accidental, but deliberate. It signaled Ontario's rejection of reliance on the U.S. market, exposing the fragility of the old paradigm and embracing a new strategy of diversification and self-reliance. The message was clear: Ontario no longer trusts the U.S. to be its primary economic partner. Instead, it is actively realigning itself with Europe and other global markets. Supply chains and infrastructure reorientation. The implications of Ontario's move extend far beyond a single battery factory. It signifies a broader reorientation of supply chains, energy sources, and strategic partnerships. The province's clean energy infrastructure, nuclear and hydroelectric, has historically been a domestic advantage, providing low-cost, renewable power for Canadian industry. Now, that advantage is being leveraged geopolitically. Power grids once interconnected deeply with U.S. states are now tools of strategic independence. Ontario's government briefly tested this leverage by imposing a temporary electricity export surcharge to U.S. states amid rising tariffs. The response was swift and revealing. Simulations showed that if Ontario were to cut off electricity entirely, neighboring U.S. states like Michigan and Minnesota would experience immediate blackouts, risking infrastructural collapse. This realization underscores a critical truth. The North American interdependence was more fragile than many understood. The infrastructure that once connected the continent's economies could, if severed, trigger chaos and economic disruption. Recognizing this vulnerability, Ontario is actively building options, diversifying energy sources, developing new supply routes, and reinforcing its autonomy.
And I think you understand that, saying this is the deal. You can take it or you can leave it.
So is the G7 sort of the deadline to decide on those retaliatory tariffs?
If we conclude in the short period of time that we're not close to a deal, obviously, as we've said, the country will look at what might be further measures to retaliate against that doubling of the steel and aluminum tariff. Canadians, I think, understand that we can't rely in terms of our prosperity and export opportunities.
Diplomatic shifts and defense realignments. Ontario's strategic pivot is mirrored in broader diplomatic and defense realignments. Prime Minister Mark Carney's decision to bypass Washington's diplomatic scene and instead meet with French President Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace was symbolic. It signaled a deliberate shift away from reliance on the U.S. and towards strengthening ties with Europe. Simultaneously, Canada is undertaking a comprehensive review of its defense contracts, moving away from U.S.-centric platforms and technologies. European defense firms, such as BAE Systems and Saab, are becoming increasingly important partners. These collaborations emphasize joint development, technology transfer, and mutual benefit, reflecting Canada's desire for strategic autonomy rather than subordinate participation in US-led defense initiatives. This new orientation isn't about isolation, but strategic insulation, protecting national interests from the unpredictability of US politics and policies. European partnerships offer technology transfer and shared innovation, reducing dependency on US restrictions and export controls. From free trade to strategic autonomy.
What people think here in Canada, that China is getting better treatment than their closest allies and friends.
The most profound element of Ontario's shift is its move away from the language of free trade to the pursuit of strategic autonomy. While the world has long accepted free trade as the ideal, the reality of recent years has shown that economic relationships are fragile, easily disrupted by political cycles and protectionist policies. In 2025, European capital is flooding into Canadian energy and infrastructure projects. Funds from Norway, the Netherlands, and Germany now fuel Canadian green energy initiatives, hydrogen hubs, and industrial corridors. Canadian pension funds, like the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, are reallocating assets away from U.S. markets and into EU-aligned sectors: renewable energy, hydrogen, electric vehicle supply chains, and advanced manufacturing. This shift reflects a fundamental recalibration. Canadian industries are increasingly oriented toward Europe and Asia, with supply chains rerouted to serve transatlantic and trans-Pacific markets. Raw materials like nickel, cobalt, and lithium, crucial for batteries and renewable technologies, are now being exported through long-term agreements with European and Asian partners, bypassing traditional U.S. gateways. The new map of North American and global trade. This evolution is reshaping North America's economic geography. Ports in Ontario are now hubs for shipments destined for Europe, with raw materials and finished goods heading east rather than south. Mines in Sudbury now load for German and Dutch factories, and supply chains for EVs and renewable energy are being reconfigured accordingly. The shift isn't just regional, it's global. Canada's energy projects, such as hydrogen pipelines in Alberta, are being designed to feed European and Asian markets, not just North American consumers. Wind projects in Saskatchewan are integrated with Nordic energy markets, and hydrogen hubs are building pipelines toward Europe and Asia, diverted from their previous focus on U.S. markets. All this activity underscores a vital theme: no longer free trade, but strategic autonomy. The absence of a formal declaration doesn't diminish the significance. Contracts, investments, and supply routes are being deliberately redirected, each one a building block in a new economic architecture designed to be resilient against political upheavals. The implications for the United States. What does this mean for the U.S.? Once the uncontested gravitational center of North American trade and industry, the U.S. is now viewed more as a risk than a partner. Tariffs, initially meant as temporary measures, have caused lasting damage. They have eroded trust and created structural shifts that are unlikely to reverse quickly. Washington's failure to recognize or adapt to this new reality risks marginalizing the U.S. economy further. Factories still hum, shipments still move, but increasingly, they are not heading where they once did. Ontario's example demonstrates that even a modest move away from reliance on the U.S. market can cascade into larger strategic realignments. This quiet revolution in Ontario's strategy signals a new era of global resilience and sovereignty. As nations reshape their alliances and forge new paths, the future belongs to those who prioritize strategic autonomy and diversification. If you found this insight compelling, give us a thumbs up, subscribe for more deep dives into global shifts, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay tuned as we continue to explore how regions worldwide are redefining their place in this changing world.